Welcome everyone to Coaching Conversations with the Executive Coaches of Orange County. My name is Ernest Stambouli and I am the chair at ECofOC. Coaching Conversations is a direct response to pressing issues and questions that we get from our clients. ECofOC is a nonprofit organization that offers no-cost leadership and management development to nonprofits in Orange County. Our mission is to help nonprofits fulfill more of their mission. We have about 60 plus coaches who are committed to listen and offer their best coaching in helping you, the philanthropic leader, take purposeful action in these challenging times. Our speaker today is Rafael Durand. He is an executive coach at ECofOC, and he is also the founder and CEO at Dxpat Consulting. So what Rafael does, he helps leaders and organizations maximize performance, development, and business results, especially in new and challenging situations. And one of his specialties is leadership development for intercultural teams. Rafael has lived and worked in 5 different countries. He is a former corporate lawyer and senior HR executive, and he brings over 35 years of experience developing both emerging and seasoned executives in Fortune 200 global companies, and as well as nonprofit organizations. So today, Rafael is going to talk about the Learning Agile leader, the silver lining in times of change. So this is a talk for all of you leaders who are grappling with the overwhelming forces of change that make the sustainable performance, development, and growth of your organization elusive targets. So here's how to participate. All webinar attendees are going to be in view and listen only mode. Please take a moment now to locate and open the Q&A window in Zoom. And during Rafael's talk, at any time, type your questions in there. And before you click send, feel free to check send anonymously if you don't want your name attached to your question. And during the presentation, Rafael will take short stops to check in with you and to answer any questions that have appeared on the board. And what I'll do, I will read them to everyone, and we will work on answering as many as we have time for. And of course, at the end, we'll have also a Q&A session until the end of the hour. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. With that, Rafael, thank you for doing this. You have the floor.
Thank you, Ernest. And good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here with us today. When we are going to have a conversation on this very important topic of learning agility and the learning agile leader as the silver lining in times of change. I have structured the presentation in four chapters, and I have pretty much organized them around questions. So we as coaches love questions. So the first question that I am going to try to answer is, what's learning agility? I'm going to give you a little bit of a background on the topic, the definition, the most accepted definition on what it is. And also I am going to talk about the 5 competency clusters or factors of learning agility. Then the second question is going to be, what is the relevance of learning agility for leaders, organizations, and for coaches overall? The third question is going to be, how can leaders develop learning agility? And the fourth and last one, what is the importance, the relevance of learning agility in times of change? And boy, we are actually experiencing times of unprecedented change, aren't we? So the last part of our meeting today is going to be questions coming from you. But I am going to try to make this conversation agile and also participatory, So I am going to stop along the way to ask if any of you have questions and address them, most probably after each one of the chapters, okay? So let's move on, but let's keep on the topic of questions. So I am going to ask you a few questions, and I would like you to answer them. They're going to actually pop up on your screen. Please answer them. There are no, these are yes or no questions. And after you have done that, we're going to come back to reflect on them and to set up the basis for our conversation. So please answer the questions that you have on the screen right now. Are you ready?
A little bit more time. We have 10 people out of 15 responded so far. So if we give it a few more seconds. Okay, well, it stopped at 10. So I'm going to end the polling and share the results.
Okay, so let's see what you got. Okay, so the first question is, the best predictor for future behavior is past behavior. So 70% of you answer no. And however, it's common knowledge that organizations in particular rely on past behavior and performance to predict future behavior. However, research has shown that even though that is important, even though that having meaningful experiences and having had success achieving results in the past is pretty much the ticket for admission, when it comes to really predict long-term, highly effective leadership and results, is not a very reliable indicator. So yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. The second question is, so high IQ, smarter people always predict better leaders. Okay, 100% said no, and that's going to make my job easier when I actually explain the outcome of several studies and research done on this topic, because yes, high IQ is normally a predictor of high performance, but not to predict success for better leaders. And the third question was, the right experience makes a qualified candidate. Here again, 70% answer no, 30% yes. Well, the right experience is so important because that's what actually makes a leader learn for the future. However, the right experience is as important as what the leader makes with that knowledge. So how the leader makes meaning of the knowledge and applies it for new and future situations. So thank you for participating on this initial part of our conversation. So let's move on. In the second half of the 20th century, social scientists, leadership development authors, and universities wrestle with the question on what is a reliable predictor to leadership success. So what are the predisposing characteristics of effective leadership? And they actually came from this idea that past performance plus demonstrated skills and abilities could actually predict potential for future success, leadership success. But they didn't know for many years what differentiates a high performer from a high professional, from a high potential leader. So a high performer, it was pretty much defined as somebody who is so good at their job in terms of results, in terms of career advancement, in terms of team management. And so that was pretty much a high performer, and it is today a high performer. Now, high performer could actually become into a high professional or a high potential. So a high professional is somebody who becomes an expert in their field. It's somebody who actually digs into the depth of a job, a depth of a field of science or knowledge. And a high potential is the individual, the leader, who is more likely to be successful in top leadership positions. So a high performer is not necessarily going to make it to a high potential. In fact, research has shown that less than 30% of individuals who are rated high performers in organizations are considered by those organizations as high potentials. Why is that? So trying to answer that question, the Center for Creative Leadership conducted a large study, a large research led by two very well-known authors today and leadership scientists, Michael Lombardo and Robert Eichinger. So Lombardo and Eichinger, they actually run this study worldwide using hundreds of leaders in all different, age groups and genders and ethnicities and everything. And they tried to answer what are the predisposing characteristics of effective leadership in the long term. Their research showed very interesting outcomes. The first one, and perhaps the most important, one of the most important for us coaches, is what they lately named the rule 70-20-10. So they concluded that leaders learn the most in their careers from experience, from on-the-job experience, from practical experience. So 70% of what we as leaders know today come from that practical on-the-job experience. 20% of what we know today as leaders come from interacting with other people, pretty much from advice and from insights that we get from other people. And 10%, about 10%, comes from formal training and education, what we learn at school, what we learn in training programs, etc. So for us coaches, this 70-20-10 rule is so critical because we know that our clients are going to develop, grow and develop, and they're going to be able to deal with the questions and the problems that they want to get solved, primarily from identifying opportunities, experimenting, learning from them, and try to apply them in the future successfully. So that was an outcome from that research. A second outcome of that research was that there's a significant difference about what leaders learn from experience. So not everybody exposed to the same kind of experience learn at the same level and the same kind of lessons. So that makes a lot of a difference for leaders in terms of making meaning of what they learn and draw the key learning points so that they can apply them in the future successfully. The third most important outcome of that research was that most developmental experiences have to be challenging. They have to push the leader out of their comfort zone. They have to be stretched. They have also to be difficult. So they become emotional, and they are experiences where the leaders think that they have skin on the game. So just being assigned to a similar job, to a lateral kind of move, or to experiences that are new but not difficult or challenging, make also a lot of a difference in the long run. The fourth lesson coming from that research was very, very, very important, because they actually came up with this result of what makes people, leaders, fail. And they actually, it took 10 more years for them to run a second research, Lombardo and Eisinger, to try to figure out what makes high learning agile leaders to fail. So they run again an assessment on hundreds of leaders, and they came up with derailing factors, leadership factors. And so basically what they discovered was that even though highly successful leaders and very strong in leadership agility could fail, and most of the times they fail because they're unwilling or incapable to change. They are unable or unwilling to learn from experience. They rely too much on a narrow set of skills, and foremost, because they become defensive about failure. So either they do not take accountability of failure, they don't make meaning of those lessons. So defensiveness was and is a major career derailer. So this is the background of the analysis for learning agility. So Lombardo and Eisinger define learning agility as the willingness and ability to learn from experience and to subsequently apply those learnings to perform successfully under new or first-time conditions. There are some elements of this definition that are critical for us as coaches, and also for leaders in general to understand. So being capable of doing something, having IQ, and even emotional and social intelligence, but not being willing to learn from that experience doesn't work in the long run. So capability and willingness have to come together so that the leader can actually make sense from that experience, make meaning of it, and then is willing to apply it successfully under new and first-time conditions. And now I'm gonna just bring a little of the concept of our conversation today, the title, that this is particularly critical in times of change, in times of crisis, because a lot of what we're going to experience going forward is going to be new or a first-time condition. So learning agility becomes a critical asset for leaders and for coaches to understand and to use. They also concluded that learning agility is different, but complementary to IQ and emotional and social intelligence. So yes, our intellectual capabilities and the way that we understand ourselves and others are critical, but what we do with it, and what we do with it in new and first-time conditions is as important as that background that we bring with us. So at the end of the day, and in a nutshell, their research showed that learning agility is pretty much a mindset and a combination of practices. Then that mindset, the positive mindset, the growth mindset, and those experiences allow leaders to continue to develop, grow, and then use those new strategies to solve increasingly complex problems. So as they grow in their careers, they are more capable of being successful along the way. Korn Ferry International, who has studied, along with Lombardo, learning agility for, again, over 40 years, came up with this model that summarizes our conversation up to now. So this model establishes that IQ plus emotional and social intelligence plus a set of competencies, meaningful competencies, multiplied by the level of learning agility in that particular individual equals long-term leadership potential. And I think that this model could be useful for us coaches to have in mind, and also to share with clients when we feel that they can actually benefit from keeping in mind this concept of learning agility and the benefits that they can actually take from applying it. Before moving on to what does it mean for a leader to be strong in learning agility, let me then explain that research also, the Lombardo and Eschinger decided to define or identify what were the critical competencies for an agile learning leader. And they categorized those behaviors and skills in 5 clusters. In these 5 clusters look alike a lot to emotional intelligence clusters, as you may remember from previous presentations on this series. So let me then just go briefly on the 5 clusters. So first and foremost, self-awareness. Research suggests that self-awareness is the most critical competency in the learning agility portfolio for leaders to be strong at. So self-awareness, self-aware leaders know what they are good at and not so good at. They solicit feedback consistently. They gain insights from mistakes. They hold themselves accountable from mistakes. Then on the mental agility cluster, those leaders are comfortable with complexity. They make fresh connections. They connect the dots easily. They search for meaning before the surface. And this is something that we coaches can help them a lot with. They are inquisitive, they're curious, and they help think things through to others. On the people agility cluster, those leaders are open-minded, are politically savvy, they can maneuver and are organizationally agile, they are flexible, and they confront interpersonal conflict productively. On the change agility side, they view opportunities, risk as opportunities, have a passion for ideas, remain calm under pressure, which is key in times of crisis. And when it comes to results agility, leaders are strong personal, they possess a strong personal drive towards achieving results. They instill confidence in others, so they are resilient when faced with bad news. They figure out how to get things done in new and challenging conditions. So this is how, at a high level, a learning agile leader looks like. So years later, in 2014, the Center for Creative Leadership and the Columbia University ran one of the most recent studies on learning agility, and they pretty much confirmed the basic findings of Lominger's and Eschinger's study. Now, they actually concluded that learning agile leaders should pay special attention not to step in the landmine of defensiveness. And I think that this is also critical for us coaches and leaders overall to be aware of. Defensiveness is like learning agility kryptonite. Defensiveness impedes learning agility. So getting defensive when challenged closes people off to learning new possibilities and prevents leaders to learn the new knowledge that they're going to need when facing problems of high level of complexity in the future. This research also showed that when bosses rated employees who are rated high on the defensiveness side of the equation, those bosses were more likely to rate the defensive leaders as less effective. And when peers and direct reports of those leaders, defensive leaders, actually, when they rated leaders who were less in defensiveness and higher in being reflective, those peers, those direct reports rated those leaders are more effective. So leadership effectiveness has a strong correlation with non-being defensive when it comes to facing challenges. Okay, so I've shared a lot of concepts with you so far. So I am going to stop right here, and I am going to open up the conversation for questions.
Rafael, I have a question for you. If I am a leader of some organization, do I have a way to assess my own learning agility?
Yes, Ernest. Yes, there are several tools and assessments in the market that are actually research-based, that measure the level of learning agility in leaders. And I'm going to actually talk about it later on in the presentation. Yes.
Thank you. There are no questions on the board.
Okay. So let's move on. So why is learning agility relevant? So what's the relevance of learning agility? And I love this Chinese proverb that says that when the winds of change rage, some people build shelters while others build windmills. So think about our new normal going forward. So that this is the opportunity for us and for leaders to do something else with adversity and in our favor and in the benefit of our teams and organizations. Okay, so learning agility is relevant for leaders because leaders who possess or demonstrate higher levels of learning agility are more likely to have higher and longer career progression going forward. And that is something that research has shown. They are also more likely to experience higher level of performance compared with peers. And also to possess higher level of resiliency, which is so important nowadays. Learning agility is relevant for leaders because they, as I showed in a previous slide, get graded as highly effective leaders by team members. And also, they are more likely to instill higher level of engagement in the people they lead. Those agile learning leaders are more likely to use a growth mindset instead of being judgmental in addressing problems and difficulties. And also, they tend to manage stress more positively. And at the end of the day, as they make meaning of the experiences, they are more likely to answer that they find their careers more meaningful than others. So that's what is relevant for leaders. What is relevant for organizations can be classified in several aspects or key processes in organizations. The first one that comes to mind is talent acquisition. So recruiting leaders is always difficult and challenging for organizations. But if they approach talent acquisition and new talent recruitment from a perspective of trying to identify traits of learning agility in the leaders that they are attracting into the team. They're more likely to be more strategic into finding the right people for the right position, having the long term in mind. When it comes to leadership development, learning agility is a critical concept for organizations too, because they can actually use learning agility assessments, like the ones that I am going to share with you in a minute, for to find out what is in what stage of the learning agility curve their leaders are, and how to best position them and help them to maximize the outcome of learning experiences. Organizations can also foster experience-based leadership development based on assignments that are uncertain, ambiguous, unpredictable, and complex. So that it's not just moving a leader to whatever position comes open, but defining what is the best set of experiences that leader is going to get into, that with additional support, perhaps from us coaches, maximize the impact in terms of learning, development, and growth for those leaders. And when it comes to the organizational aspect of those teams, it is important to say that organizations can also benefit from either strengthening or focusing on the entrepreneurship aspects of the culture, so that they can become more of a learning culture that favors experience and that pretty much promotes, if you will, learning from mistakes, of course, based on calculated risks, but doesn't penalize making mistakes on leaders. Then for coaches, learning agility, in my opinion, is relevant because we play a key role in helping leaders reflect, reframe, give up non-relevant skills, learn new ones that are relevant. We help them to make meaning from experience, which is so critical, as we have seen, when it comes to ensure that they draw strategically the key learnings from that experience so that they can use it repeatedly in the future successfully. We can also help them through understanding learning agility in terms of improving the level of self-awareness, which is so critical. And last but not least, we can, as a catalyst, help them to identify potential landmines and reduce defensiveness that could derail their careers and be an obstacle, an invisible obstacle for their efforts. So I think that that's clear for coaches too. Now, how to develop learning agility, and here is where I am going to answer Ernest's question in more detail. So first of all, understanding and applying the 70-20-10 rule is so important for leaders to strengthen their learning agility competencies. Focusing on the-job experience, making meaning of that, choosing experiences that are difficult, challenging, that are going to push them out of their comfort zone, experiences that are new and that not necessarily what they are comfortable with and they're experienced with. So the type and the nature of the experiences are going to be relevant. So balancing these sources of knowledge is critical. Then getting exposed to diverse and challenging assignments, meaning if what those leaders crave is what those leaders envision having as a career is continued progression in an organization, in a business, focusing on breadth type of experience rather than depth is important. Now, that doesn't mean that high professionals, or for example, technicians, scientists, who pretty much focus on the depth side of what they choose for the field of action, are not they don't have learning agility or high level of learning agility. They could, however, it's like if somebody is focused on the tree and somebody is focused on the forest. So we have, as coaches, to identify what our clients are envisioning for themselves, and as leaders, what do we really want of our careers. So this is important, an important conversation within ourselves. Then assessing our level of learning agility is important. There are at least 3 tools in the market that are research-based and that are that pretty much address the concept of assessing learning agility from 3 different models. The one that I know the best is the Korn Ferry Choices Assessment, but there are others in the market. So Mercer's Medal Learning Agility Assessment is another one. And the Center for Creative Leadership developed, based on the research in 2014, another learning agility assessment inventory, LIIA. So these 3 assessments at least can give organizations or leaders a snapshot of where they are in the different clusters or competency groups. Then demonstrating consistency, resilience, and humility is important for developing learning agility. The competencies that I referred to in the past, self-awareness, people agility, change agility, mindset agility, results agility, they all have a different level of difficulty when it comes to for people to develop. So those competencies are going to take most of the times time, effort, and a lot of motivation for people to improve on them and to strengthen them. So these are not competencies that necessarily going to get fixed in 2 or 3 weeks or a couple of months. So they require a lot of effort and focus. And that's where we coaches play a critical role in helping our clients succeed. Then, in a nutshell, and with this slide, I end my conversation today with you. So what is the importance of learning agility in times of change, in times of crisis like the ones that we are actually facing nowadays? Well, learning agility determines to a great extent how leaders succeed in turbulent times. By focusing leaders on the learning aspect of the experience and making meaning of it, they're a long way to help themselves and help the organizations and their teams to move on and to progress. Also, helping leaders to know what to do when they don't know what to do goes a long way. And think about this concept. So how many times we don't know what to do when we don't know what to do, but what if we could actually address a challenge, a conflict, a difficulty by figuring out what to do, even if we don't know what to do, even if we don't have enough information, even if we don't have experienced that particular situation in the past. So the way we approach it from the learning agility perspective is going to be a good hint on how to answer that paradoxical question, the paradoxical statement. Then unprecedented challenging situations offer unique opportunities to maximize growth and development. So we coaches can help our clients to approach challenges with the right mindset, use learning agility as a leadership from the leadership toolkits, and strengthen those competencies for future career progression. And then team members benefit by being led by grounded, balanced, composed, and highly agile learning leaders. So it's in everybody's best interest, leaders, organizations, and teams, to focus on this concept, particularly in times of crisis. So I finished my presentation with these thoughts, and I invite all of you to and Ernest, you can share my presentation with the participants. Please feel free to do it. And in the last slide, I actually included further reading and resources for you. If you are interested and curious to learn more about learning agility, there are several links there who are going to take you to white papers, to magazine articles, to a guide that I put together for helping clients. So feel free to get into that further reading and resources page for additional information on learning agility. And so let's open up the floor to questions.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. So please type in your questions in the Q&A box. We had a question from earlier, Rafael, so I'll read it to you. It's in the chat box. This is from Kim Q. How do you teach someone to be less defensive?
I think that, first of all, we need to help people understand the importance of not being defensive. When people understand the potential implications of approaching new or first-time conditions and approaching difficulties from a defensive standpoint, from not accepting feedback, from not making meaning and learning from mistakes. Once they understand the high stakes of not doing that, I think that they're going to be in a better position to then figure out by themselves what are the key actions that they need to take to reduce the volume of defensiveness in their lives. As coaches, we can always ask questions to challenge assumptions, because most of the times defensiveness comes from our paradigms, the way that we process stimulus, the way we process reality. And when we perceive that stimulus, that comment, that life circumstance, that we perceive it as a threat, we try to avoid it. And we try not to confront it. So we coaches, most of the times, help leaders to reflect on their own values, their own principles, in a way to help them question their paradigms and find ways to reframe them and to change them. I hope that I answered the question.
I have a follow-up question. This is one of my own questions that has to do with this particular question, but not specifically about defensiveness, but more about learning agility. So I noticed from my own practice, and I've read a lot about how uncertainty and not knowing what to do in high stakes situation, and I think you spoke to that a little bit earlier. So not knowing what to do in high stakes situation tends to humble people, and they become more willing to listen and learn, right? But in the same token, I also noticed that there are some people where they're kind of, I don't know, we call it personality does not allow them to do that. A cynical person, for example, somebody that's holding on too hard on what they already know, which in situations of change will have become obsolete. Is there any data on like personality types or characters where learning, agile learning does not apply or will not work?
Research showed, Ernest, that we all bring our own background, our own personality, our own set of sort of fixed conditions based on which we have been able to succeed to whatever extent. Mm-hmm. And so reading the research and reading some of the books, what I learned is that for some people it gets more easy to accept feedback, to be open to criticism, and not to be defensive. However, research also shown, particularly in those research studies 40 years ago, that learning agility does not have, so that leaders in all different categories and groups, ethnic, age, gender, culture, basics, that learning agility applies the same to all different groups. So that's why the element of willingness, Ernest, is so important in the definition. The element of being not only able but willing to learn from experience and apply those differences in new and first-time future conditions is so important. So for people who default mindset is a fixed mindset, not a growth mindset, people in a fixed mindset is going to have a harder time to develop learning agility competencies. They're going to require more introspection. They're going to require more focus, persistence, and they're going to have to develop a higher level of humility in the front end to be able to then challenge assumptions, change paradigms, and eventually strengthen learning agility competencies.
Thank you. All right, we don't see any more questions on the board. We'll give it a few more seconds in case you have questions. We have another question, Michael. Rafael, how would you think about the authenticity and the vulnerability impact, agility, and defensiveness? So how authenticity and vulnerability impact agility and defensiveness?
Let me see if I understood the question so that I can answer appropriately. So the question is, what do I think in terms of the authenticity, and what is the second word?
So how authenticity and vulnerability?
Well, I refer to the competency cluster of self-awareness as one of the most critical and important in the learning agility portfolio. So that, self-awareness, so knowing yourself and knowing how you actually impact others is one of the most critical competencies in this toolkit. So being authentic and being willing to be vulnerable is one of the most important predispositions for somebody to be open to feedback, somebody to be willing to ask for feedback and to make meaning of it. So learning new or first time lessons from experience require that high level of humility. And I think that for us coaches, helping leaders to understand that and be comfortable within becoming more open and becoming more willing to be vulnerable, the more likely that they're going to maximize the impact of the new experiences as they grow their careers.
Okay. We have a question from Heidi. Can you suggest a tool or approach for giving and receiving feedback?
The two concepts that come to mind, Heidi, is first of all, ask for feedback. And ask for feedback consistently. The second one is process that feedback as a gift, not as an attack. And for many people, for a lot of people, neither one of those two concepts come easy to them. In my early years in my career, I expected people, particularly my bosses, to give me feedback as part of their obligation as leaders. And I never asked feedback from them. I just waited 1 year for them to come to the performance appraisal meeting and give me feedback. And whenever they gave me positive feedback, according to my paradigms, I was very happy. But if they, at the end of the meeting, came to me with a piece of constructive feedback, as we named them at that time, everything else was just thrown away, and I became defensive. So asking for feedback and making meaning of it and receive it as a gift, I think that are two critical ways or steps to benefit from feedback. Now, most leaders also, many leaders, and that was my case for some time, receive only positive feedback, because giving constructive or negative feedback is very hard for many leaders to do. So for years, I only received positive feedback until I actually faced situations where I didn't ask for feedback, and I was not offered constructive feedback, and then I hit the wall because I didn't know what to improve because I didn't ask for it and nobody told me. So not only asking for feedback, but asking the right questions when you ask for feedback. So if you only get positive feedback in return, be suspicious and then ask more questions. Make sure that the person who is providing with feedback gives you a balanced picture of yourself on that feedback.
Thank you. I have a question as a follow-up on this one. I remember early in my career, I was still in my probably late 20s, I remember I had this boss. He was leading whole department, who used to go around on a regular basis, go around and ask the younger folks like me, well, how am I doing? How am I doing? He wanted feedback on a regular basis. And at the time, my age, my thinking at the time, I used to see him as a weak leader, although he was recognized as a seasoned leader. How do you ask for feedback without appearing weak, and of course appearing weak to different listenings, listening to a young person, listening to a person who is at your level of experience?
Ernest, what comes to mind is perhaps you ask your boss, particularly if you think that your boss is not going to have an easy time giving you constructive feedback, you may want to ask, for example, what can I do to help you, my boss, in addressing a particular problem that we both know that we're experiencing as a team, as a company? Another question that comes to mind could be, what could I continue doing, stop doing, or start doing to help our team better?
Nice.
So then you actually give them a range for giving you positive feedback, but then you also are going to put him in a position to tell you what you should actually either stop doing or do less of, that can actually give you the right type of feedback that you need to balance your the value of the feedback on you. Did I answer the question?
Yes, you did, with excellent examples, and I appreciate that. So the time is up. There is one comment on the board that's worth mentioning from Anderson. Congratulations for the lecture, Rafael. A lot of insight from it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last words, Rafael, before we conclude the session.
Well, I hope that I just planted a seed of curiosity in your brains, and that you are now more curious about learning on learning agility. And if you want to continue the dialogue and the conversation on the topic, please contact me in LinkedIn, and we can actually keep the conversation going. Thank you very much to everyone.
Rafael, thank you very much. This was very valuable information. So this completes the webinar. Before you sign off, we would greatly appreciate it if you took 1 minute to respond to a very short survey. It's going to pop out once you sign off. This will help us improve our service to you. So this completes the webinar. Rafael, thank you again. We'll see you next time. Keep an eye on the announcements for the next coaching conversation. That's it. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Thank you, Ernest. Thank you, everybody.